So Matt, I guess in the APT space, we're seeing some new tactics, some activities taking place. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's a little bit of the old and a little bit of the new. So it looks like Kaspersky, last year, they reported on a malware family called Miniduke. Mm-hmm. And it seems that they've seen an uptick in Miniduke activity, and there's a new modification to the malware. Now, the malware was known for a few things originally. That it was written in assembly, which takes forever. It means whoever's writing it's very well, competent. Mm-hmm. That it used a number of different C2 options, including Twitter, and that it was sending updates packaged inside of a GIF file. So it looked like an image file, but you unpack it and it's actually the malware. The newest version has some modifications to that, still using Twitter, have a whole bunch of different options as well for different kinds of command and control. The updates are a little sneakier now. It seems like they're taking the actual file and cutting it into a whole bunch of smaller versions, compressing those individual pieces, encrypting those pieces, and then repackaging them in some other way. And it seems to be intended to make it harder to get the entire sample at once. So whereas if a malware researcher knew that they could go to a particular URL and get the entire binary, here they have to be able to get each individual sliver and unpack that, decrypt that, and then reconstitute the entire thing.
To reassemble it all together again, right?
Right. So it's again to make it more difficult for someone who's trying to analyze it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting. There's it looks to be packed with a custom packer, and there's a few strings in there. I wasn't quite sure from reading the article if it was called BotGen Studio, but that was one of the new mystery strings that came out of this. Nitro was another one. And then there was Nemesis Gemina, which is just, fun to say, but confusing. But these all seem to hint to either internal names of the malware itself, or they could just be, red herrings. Who knows? Right. Lots of speculation to be sure about.
Well, you see that level of sophistication in other aspects of it. You kind of wonder if these kinds of little hints are really good hints, right?
Right. That they could be completely redirecting you somewhere else. Now, the target set is probably a better indicator of what this is all about. It seems that the majority of the targets are in Russia, the United States, Georgia, and the UK, with a few other countries scattered in there as well. Mm-hmm. Another thing that was kind of interesting about it that I thought was that it seems Kaspersky got a hold of one of the command and control servers. They don't really go into that, but I'm sure they have their methods. Mm-hmm. And they actually found that the attackers had uploaded a whole other set of tools as well. So they got an insight into the attacker toolkit, and they had some standard stuff like SQL Map, Hydra, but they also had some tools for breaking into Joomla and WordPress blogs, which I personally thought was interesting because I seem to think that the APT guys are after very high value targets. They've got a very specific way of doing things, but the Joomla and WordPress are sort of like low-hanging fruit.
Well, perhaps. So I guess that I'm conjecturing here, but one is that you'd mentioned using Twitter as command and control, so that may be an alternative path for command and control that would look legitimate otherwise.
Okay.
Right, and so
we have seen that in the past.
And we have seen that sort of thing in the past.
With APT actors. Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
And another example might be being able to use it as a watering hole. So you might be able to get content distributed through a WordPress site that would be actually, malware, but wouldn't appear to be malware from the site, from the proxy's point of view, for example. So, that's speculation on my part, but certainly possibilities that they might be doing.
Both good points.
Yeah. Now, I was kind of curious. You mentioned it was done in assemblers. Any significance to that from a victim's point of view or somebody that's trying to analyze it?
Maybe. So first off, the new version, it appears that some or all of the code is now written in C. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit different. If you're writing in assembly, the sort of the signatures that you see for certain languages, like, every language, every compiler, if you bring it down to assembly, there'll be certain optimizations or certain tricks that a compiler will use, or the language will just throw in there, that you'll be able to say, okay, I recognize this structure, this is C. I'll recognize this structure, this is something else. Writing in assembly, none of that will appear. I mean, maybe some of the same logic applies, but you won't see these characteristics, and you won't be able to characterize the source of the malware, I think, as easily.
Yeah, so it could make the reverse engineering more complex because you don't see those regular structures. A loop structure could be very obscure looking in an assembler, whereas it's going to be relatively straightforward if you can recognize the compiler that's being used.
But on the other hand, there are certain tools that can be used to make the actual assembly output of a program impossible to read. So if a human being wrote this, it's more likely, in my opinion, to be just the functionality that you need, and a lot, not as much of the crazy, running through 1,000 loops to do something over here to distract you.
So you have the opportunity to be much more efficient, more compact. The Slammer worm was actually a pretty good example. That was done in assembler, and by necessity, in fact, and that it was really just a 500-byte program. And it was conveyed in a single packet, able to exploit the vulnerability in a Microsoft SQL Server and install itself and begin the propagation process beyond that point. I don't think it did anything beyond that, but it certainly did it very efficiently, was able to propagate very quickly, and really had wreaked havoc on the internet in general. And this was back in, was it 2001, I think, so way back in the early worm days. But one of the, I think one of the efficiency examples of that type of coding. I have one other question. Can you explain a little bit about how they're using Twitter for command and control?
So it looks like they've got a number of different Twitter handles set up. I actually tried looking at some of the samples that were out there. It looks like they're using some sort of encryption mechanism and then wrapping the text with a base64 encoding, so it can be represented as ASCII text. And then I think they stick some characters at the start of it to indicate that this is command and control message, just in case the code wasn't sure or tried to for some reason read a non-valid message. They seem to have changed that little token at the front since the last version. Okay. But I haven't seen the process for going from base64 blob to command and control yet.
So conceivably, you'd be able to sort of scan the social media to find those characteristics of perhaps even just non-readable, not human language type things. I'm not sure how much of that really exists in Twitter in a native sense, but clearly it's one of these more sophisticated methods of propagating. I mean, in that sense, you can kind of think of Twitter as a monster IRC server, right?
If you know what to look for, yeah.
Limited in terms of the number of characters that you can put into a message, but certainly fits in that context. And they could potentially use multimedia for posting command and control as well, which
I think
Twitter,
base64 would stand out like a sore thumb in Twitter postings. You would think that the Twitter folks would probably notice something like there's a little amiss here. But images would be a great way to obfuscate it so that you post an image and it's got something embedded in there with some steganography or something that has the command and control information that wants to deliver.
But the other thing about the images, and you were saying that you could search for it, it's possible that they're thinking to, instead of actually embedding the names, a malware author, instead of embedding names, could say, here's the string you look for on Twitter, use the search function, and then find its command and control that way without giving away where the control points are, and then change them every hour.
Yeah, so little tricks like that. So I mean, we could conjecture for hours on these kinds of topics. Certainly, things that folks that are looking for this type of thing should be looking out for, and also using their own imagination on how some of these things could be done.